Hi folks, well my winter project finally arrived and here it is, unfortunately. Let's see if we can recover something from this crumpled up box. I bought the Dancing Wings Firebird to replace my Savage Bobber, which has a definitely limited lifespan. I bought it in kit form from Banggood, which cost me $55 Australian including postage and took about a month to arrive. I intend to use the motor, the servos and the receiver from the Savage Bobber.
If you want to skip the build process, advance the video to 12 minutes in for the time lapse.
Let's open the box and see what we find. Here's the instruction manual, which is just the same as the Savage Bobber, with easy to follow step-by-step instructions on how to build it. A couple of the foam pieces were quite badly dented, but I managed to flatten those out with a bit of treatment from a hot kettle. Here's the carbon fibre rods and the wheels. The wheels are a little bit smaller than the Savage Bobber, which had foam wheels that I had to make. These ones are already made, but they're quite a lot smaller, which won't be so good for takeoffs and landings. The Savage Bobber had a carbon fibre frame fuselage. This one comes with a solid side foam fuselage, and it, as you can see, it practically fits perfectly onto the side of the bobber, so it's very similar style construction as the Savage Bobber. That should be a lot more robust, I think, than the carbon fibre frame here that I've covered with tissue paper. And finally here, the very fine plywood ribs and formers. A little bit warped, so I'll have to straighten that up before I start. Otherwise, it looks like it's in okay condition. Let's get started with the build.
One of the lessons I learnt from building the Savage Bobber was that none of the plywood parts fitted together straight off. So I invested a bit of time with a nail file, just smoothing off the edges to make them fit together better. I'm sure it will pay off.
So the first step is to attach or glue using foam glue the plywood sides to the foam sides. And I'm going to use foam glue for that. While that foam glue is curing, I'm going to glue together the formers that make the engine mount and the formers that make the undercarriage mount. Now I need to glue the box section to the foam sides. All that time I spent filing down the little connections and gaps for the plywood has really paid off, because this is fitting together really nicely. When I built the Savage Bobber, nothing fitted, and when you tried to force the plywood pieces together they just snapped. So this is coming together really nicely and I'm really pleased with how it's going so far. Now that the sides are done, I just need to glue the base of the fuselage in place.
And there you have it, phase 1 completed.
Right, I'm pretty pleased with the way things are going so far. The parts are fitting together quite well. I've got to the stage now where I need to put in these two formers here in the fuselage and feed the carbon fibre rods through for the rudder and the elevator. I've come across an issue with the formers that go in here. In the instructions it says to glue the two partitions A5 into the dotted lines on the inside of the side panels of the fuselage. Well, there are no dotted lines, so it took me a little while, but I eventually figured out which way up and which orientation to put them in so that the carbon fibre rods would feed through. The next instruction is to attach the Z connectors which connect to the servos for the rudder and the elevator. However, those parts, the little metal Z connectors that connect to the servo horns, they're missing from the kit, so that's really annoying. I did, however, find in my parts a little bit of piano wire here, which hopefully will at least allow me to proceed with the rudder and elevator servos. So let's get on with that. While the foam glue is drying in the fuselage, I've made a couple of Z connectors from the piano wire that I had, and it looks like they'll do the job okay with the control horns that I've been given. Okay, so the next step is to insert the carbon rods into the fuselage and glue the top section in, which I'll do now. The next instruction says to glue the windscreen and top cowling in place, but I'm not going to do that because reading on I can see that it looks like this little flap needs to lift in order to install the battery. This doesn't look like a very good system, and videos that I've seen of this plane, I've seen that little flap flying up on its own, so I'll probably sort out some kind of latch or magnets or something down the track. They then tell you to install the servos in place. I'm going to hold off on that as well because I'm not quite ready to take the servos out of the Savage Bobber. So I will proceed with the next step, which is building the wing. Let's get started on that. Alrighty then, it's time to build the wings. I've checked, I've got all the parts. I've got the foam top and bottom, I've got the plywood ribs, and I've got the carbon fibre rods. And I'll be super gluing the ribs into the wings, into here, and then folding over and foam gluing the tops on. So let's get started. I will now let the glue harden thoroughly before folding over the tops of the wings. With the Savage Bobber, I used steam from the kettle on the leading edge to start this process. It made the fold a lot easier. Now that the glue is set, I'm going to glue the top half of the wings on. Possibly overkill, but I'm going to make sure there are no warps on these wings. Right, the wings are now complete, and while I'm waiting for the new servos for the wings to arrive, I'm going to progress with installing the rudder and the tail plane to the fuselage. First I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle on the tail plane, then attach it with hinge tape. Next, I'm going to install this reinforcing rod into the tail plane, attach it to the fuselage, and attach this control horn. While that glue is setting, I'll make a start on the tail fin rudder. Next I'm going to glue these paper hinges onto the rudder and then attach the rudder to the fuselage. And there you have it. Tailplane and rudder all attached.
I've now installed the rudder and elevator servos. When I was putting them in, the plywood completely collapsed, so I installed some reinforcing cross members, and now it's installed quite securely.
For the windscreen and the bonnet, I glued a couple of ply cross beams across there, and I glued the windscreen onto that, and I've got a tape hinge here for the little bonnet, and I'll probably put a magnet or some kind of clip in place to hold that down. Hopefully that won't get in the way of putting the battery in there. It just squeezes in just nicely. Well, this is exciting. I'm nearly finished with the build. All that's remaining is to fit the motor and connect up the rods to the servos and the ailerons, to the control horns, and then I think we're good to go. And that's the ailerons all connected up. And I've put a little bit of mix in there to give a little bit of rudder from the learnings from the Savage Bobber. Let's put the motor in.
All complete and ready to fly. Here's a time lapse of the build.
There you have it, all finished. Motor installed, ailerons working, rudder elevator working, and I've installed this little hatch here with magnets to hold the little hatch down where the battery can go in the front. It pops in just like that. All done, ready for the maiden flight.
She weighs in at 86 grams without battery and 101 grams with a 220 mAh battery. The Firebird packs up like this, ready to be transported in my backpack. I'm on my way to the park for the maiden flight. The question is, will it fly? Stay tuned for the next installment where I test fly the Firebird in the park.